Hello. Thank you so much for joining me. Very excited to be talking about John Keats and his famous sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer. If you've been with the channel, you know how we fearlessly explore sonnets from many different eras and people from all over the world in the English language. And here we are going to look at a renowned late romantic in John Keats. So it's a special pleasure to be able to discuss perhaps a sonnet that and a figure more people are familiar with. Now, before we dive in, I just wanted to remark on the topic here. John Keats, at this point, obviously he died very young of consumption, but he wrote this poem earlier in his career. Perhaps you could call it finishing his apprenticeship of sorts. And he's writing this about another poet, George Chapman, famous for his translations of Homer, which had been completed a few hundred years ago. At this time, Alexander Pope's translations of Homer were probably more dominant. But here in this poem, John Keats is able to secure a copy of the scarcer Chapman's version and experience this moment of revelation. It's hard to understand from our perspective the significance of the Hellenistic or Greek world to people, to romantics, and to people in general, part of this broad Renaissance movement. But for them, Homer, the author of the, or mythic author of the Odyssey and the Iliad, had been lost for a long period of time, and they only had either Latin derivatives or broadly speaking, just Roman culture and Roman products and their version of the Hellenistic world were more dominant. But with the recovery of these texts during the Renaissance, there's this kind of reawakening and reimagining of kind of a sense of huge sense of discovery as what it meant to be a human being. And what our values and priorities could be moving forward. So it's kind of almost like the discovery of a new science for them, you could say. Certainly seems that way to Keats. We'll discuss some of his comparisons here. On first looking into Chapman's Homer, much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards and fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told that deep-browed Homer ruled as his domain. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. So, let's first acknowledge the clever use of this gold imagery. I always remark when we find gold in a poem, there must be something going on. It's very difficult for a poet literally to place gold into a poem without it sounding cheesy or overstated. And here, what Keats is going to do is he's going to establish this baseline of gold in the octave, describing how amazing and how impressive his earlier travels to antiquity have been through indirect sources, either through Alexander Pope or through reading about it or through Roman sources. It doesn't exactly explain. But he says, goodly states and kingdoms seen, the Western Islands, and bards and fealty to Apollo, so the god Apollo. But then that's the first octave establishes kind of baseline is it's great, it's already great, it's really good. and it's going to escalate. But I know of that there's something even better. And I'm really interested in this thing that's going to be even better, that where Homer was, where the greatest bard of them all. Never had I experienced that. And then that octave, those first 8 lines, they complete, and there's going to be a pivot where now we're anticipating what is it going to be like when he finally hears Homer, translated, of course. And what do we get? We get, instead of this sense of connectedness with people before, or your forebears, or ancestry, or any other thing, or like, I wonder what it was like to live in ancient times, or anything like that. Instead, we get, I felt like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken. So we get this very strange kind of contrast between the old world and the discoveries of science in the new world. And it kind of evokes almost like Galileo discovering something. This new idea that the world might not be centered around Earth, but might be centered on other things bigger than we have ever imagined before. Then it progresses from there in this sestet, in the last 6 lines of the poem, where it talks about Cortez discovering a new land. So it's talking about voyages of discovery here, of colonization and conquest of the New World. Now, John Keats, of course, doesn't have our perspective of these complicated mixed feelings we have today on colonization and conquest. For him, the discovery of America, or the discovery of the Pacific, was this fascinating, amazing revelation of all these new possibilities that are now available to him. And he ends with this, this image of a mountaintop, which, could be evocative of something like Apollo, Mount Olympus, or something of those like that. But it's a dramatic recentering that this poem enacts. The rhyme scheme here we have in the octave, we have the gold rhymes with hold, and then the seen and been, and then in the second we repeat the second 4 lines. We repeat that same rhyme scheme. You can see this hold and gold here, and then told and bold. So it's A B B A. And then seen and been and domain and serene. So it's ABBA, ABBA. So he's able to find rhyme words basically twice in a row without anything sounding forced. It's extremely subtle. It's extremely skillful, which is kind of a hallmark of Keats, where he has this ease with rhyming that seems impossible. It seems like, even Shakespeare's sonnets don't seem to have this amount of facility and naturalness with rhyme. And he varies these sounds, these long E and A sounds, and gives you a little bit of assonance, a variety of those of those sounds, so it doesn't chime as much. And we see that again. We see his fluency with rhyme again in the sestet, skies and eyes, ken and men, surmise, and then darien with men. Very, very understated his use of enjambment. So you can see sometimes he has these kind of full stops, and then he has enjambed lines, like bin carries right over here to which bards. The variance of the pacing of the poem is appealing and interesting, and it holds our attention, really fulfilling the expectations of the sonnet in a very whole, spot-on way. So he doesn't cheat or nudge any of the quote-unquote rules of the sonnet. He will in later of his sonnets. This one he approaches straight up. That's, I guess, the main thing I want to offer us here is Keats has this ability that few poets have to recenter the imaginative, the poetry around the imaginative capabilities of the reader and the poet, where something going backwards and reading this old text becomes this exercise in imagining all of the new possibilities and new ways that the imagination can be used going forward. So you see this his intellect kind of moving in these two different directions at the same time. And the more he becomes kind of grounded and rooted in tradition, the more actually his imagination becomes unlocked and soars and flies. The eagle that we see there is just this kind of early indication that Keats is going to, in his poetry, be able to soar in ways that perhaps no other poet exactly has accomplished, in English at least, of this pure ability to depart into fantasy, into dreams, into whatever he can see in his mind, he can embody in his poetry. So I do look forward to doing another Keats poem with you, another Keats sonnet, but I also look forward to hearing your suggestions on some favorite poets or favorite sonnets of yours that we could delve into together. So please do consider subscribing, and please do leave me a comment on what's helpful, perhaps even what you disagree with. That's always lovely to hear. I've had some really interesting conversations with folks as a result. So come on board and let's have some fun together, folks. See you very soon.